Charlie brought the steaming mugs out and set them on the table next to Ruby, whose full attention was on the basket of yarn and needles in her lap. "Thank you, dear," she muttered, distractedly. Planting a kiss on her grandmother's head. "You're missing Sophia and Xavier kissing." Ruby jumped as her head snapped up to watch the screen. Charlie laughed as Ruby grumbled at the lie. Shaking her head at her grandma, Charlie skipped back to her bedroom to get more homework done. Leaving the door open in case Ruby needed anything, she settled back at her desk. The sounds of Ruby's show drifted through the air as she stretched her neck and popped her knuckles, a terrible habit she'd tried too many times to give up. Determination swirled through her as she stared at the screen. College was something she'd never expected. Being homeschooled by parents that weren't much interested in teaching her anything that couldn't be used when the world ended meant she'd been behind. When she turned 18, she'd followed in Cass's footsteps and left. The one time she'd acted like her older sister. She still couldn't sit with the guilt from watching the betrayal on her parents' faces. They'd expected Cass to leave. She'd always had one foot out the door since she was a teenager. But not Charlie. She was supposed to be the dutiful daughter. At least, that's what their dad would say. Yet here she was, living a normal life away from the compound. Ruby welcomed her with open arms the afternoon she'd knocked on her door, praying her grandmother hadn't moved since she'd last visited years ago. "It's about time, Charlotte. Come on in, and we can get you settled," Ruby had said with a knowing smile. It had hit Charlie that perhaps she and Cass weren't so different. They'd both left their parents' commune at 18 and headed straight to Ruby's house. Though Cass hadn't stayed for more than a few days before leaving for college. And here Charlie was, a year later, still living in the tiny closet of a spare bedroom. But Charlie wasn't exactly like her sister. At least she'd listened to her parents' lectures and helped around their farm. She even visited her parents. Cass hadn't been home in years. They may be frosty, but they still invited her in for dinner on the first Sunday of every month. Pushing the unwelcome thoughts of her parents and sister from her mind, Charlie pulled the blank notepad toward her. Just because she'd always wanted to go to college didn't mean she enjoyed the classes. Currently, economics was kicking her butt. Staring at the screen, her eyes glazed over for a moment. Then she blinked and opened the practice quiz. Reading the first question, she mulled it over and scratched the back of her neck. At least she could cross economist off her long list of potential future careers. Turns out she had very little interest in the subject. Closing her eyes, she hit a random answer. Just as she went to hit submit, the computer died. Charlie let out a strangled sound of irritation as the desk lamp flickered and went out. The house was plunged into silence as the power cut off. Down the hallway, Charlie heard Ruby's huff of annoyance. Dragging herself up, she poked her head out the door. "Check the fuses, will you?" Ruby called. "On it." Slipping out of the small, brick-built house, Charlie glanced across the yard. In the distance, she could make out ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. Seems that the storm brewing had been enough to knock out the power. It didn't surprise her. This was typical small-town living. As she was flipping the switches on the fuse box, she surveyed the yards along the street. Around them were other older folk. Most lived alone. Ruby had inherited her property from her parents, claimed as her home when Charlie's grandpa had died, and she'd gotten away from the doomsday preppers. Charlie stuck her head through the front door and shouted, "I'm going to check on the neighbors. Looks like there's a storm coming this way." "You are such an angel, Charlie. I thank my lucky stars every day that you finally showed up on my porch. Grab the cookies I made yesterday and bring them with you. The old bats won't appreciate you stopping by and checking on them. The cookies will help," Ruby called back. Charlie threw on her all-weather bomber jacket and grabbed the wrapped tray of oatmeal cookies. Smiling, she stepped back out into the chilly winter day. Just another month or so until the cold seeped away and the sun began warming the earth. Like every year, she eagerly awaited the first day of spring. Her smile slid off her face as she stared at the threatening clouds. Winter wasn't done with them yet. Hopefully the power would be back on by the evening. Otherwise, she'd be digging through the garage for the propane-powered space heater and camping grill.